Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SSD and CAL's workshop on navigating UVIC accommodations. Oh, our image seems to have not loaded there, but that's okay. We're gonna go. Okay, great, that image loaded. So before we get started, we're going to do a territorial acknowledgement. So we acknowledge and respect that the SSD, the CAL, and UVIC in general is located on the unceded, unsurrendered, and stolen territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, as well as the Wasanich peoples. Um, the Everyone here has a relationship to the land that they are on. For the folks here that are not on campus, you may be calling in from a different location. And if you would like to, you can put where you're calling in from in the chat and do a little land acknowledgement of that area. But I encourage you to think about how you connect with the land that you are on right now and the land that you live on and spend lots of time on, because this land has been occupied by Indigenous people forever and still continues to be occupied by Indigenous peoples. So we, myself as a settler and anyone else who's a settler, I encourage you to kind of reflect on that and think about your relationship with the land and how you use it, and how we can always be better guests on unceded land. So with that, we're gonna get started. And I want everyone to meet who is facilitating today. I've been talking a little bit already. My name is Marissa. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the Education and Administration Coordinator of the Society for Students with a Disability. Simon, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'm Simon, and I'm the manager of the CAL assessment program. And I use he, him pronouns. Yeah.
Great. And Sydney, would you like to go?
Yes. Hi, I am Sydney LaMarche. I realized that I had started to say that and then realized that I was on mute because I am an elder millennial and that's just what we do. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the CAL advisors, predominantly in mental health, although I do have students who have all kinds of different diagnoses, but primarily mental health.
Thank you so much, Sydney and Simon. So Sydney and Simon will be here to answer any questions you may have, any sort of clarifying elements, and then at the end we'll also have a time for Sydney and Simon to answer questions about CAL or about accommodations at UVIC in general. So to get started, we're just going to go through a quick agenda. We're going to go over, because I'm from the SSD, Sydney and Simon are from CAL, we're going to go over kind of what are our similarities and differences and who we each are, how to register for CAL, examples of accommodations, and then we'll have a Q&A with CAL, and then we'll do a bit of a student-led discussion after that. So to get started, the SSD versus CAL. The SSD, which is where I am, we are part of the UVSS, which is the Undergraduate Student Union, the University of Victoria Student Society. So our office is here in the Student Union building, which is where Felicitas is. It's where Clubs and Course Unions Day took place. It's kind of right across the street from the bus loop, if you're not familiar with where the building is. We are an advocacy group, so we don't provide academic support, but we do peer and advocacy support. Our membership, to be a member of the SSD, requires self-identification, so we don't require any sort of documentation or self-disclosure in order to come use our space or come use our services. And this is a quote from our website: "The SSD aims to support students who self-identify as having one or more disabilities. In particular, we support students to reduce barriers in the social, emotional, and educational domains of life." So what that big long sentence means is we do more of kind of the social, the advocacy end of being a disabled student at UVIC. So we run workshops, we do programming, we have events, and we do peer support, as well as have like a physical space on campus for disabled students to come and use whenever they need to. The CAL is a little bit different. We serve the same or similar students, but we are totally two different organizations. So the SSD is actually not part of the CAL. We are separate, but what the CAL does is they're part of UVIC. So they are under the university, whereas we're under the student union. The CAL works with faculty and students to promote educational accessibility for students with disabilities and chronic health conditions. So their mandate and their role is to provide academic accommodations and work on kind of the academic and educational side of being a student with a disability. The CAL also requires documentation in order to be able to register with them. And they, as I mentioned, can provide academic accommodations for a variety of settings, including classrooms, labs, assignments, and exams. So you might be wondering, are you eligible for CAL accommodations? Certain disabilities and health conditions, you may qualify to register with the CAL to have academic accommodations. I know I am personally a CAL student, and when I registered for the CAL, I wasn't sure if I qualified, but there's a non-exhaustive list of qualifying disabilities, and if you have questions about it, you can let Sydney or Simon know. But some disabilities or diagnoses that may qualify you to register for CAL include learning disabilities, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, a mental health diagnosis, long-term recurring physical or sensory disability, or a chronic health condition. That also may include things like spinal cord injuries, being deaf or hard of hearing, being blind or low vision, or chronic conditions that you may not think of related to CAL, like migraines, if they impact your academic abilities. There are some disabilities. Oh, Sydney, yes.
I just wanted to add in that yes, absolutely, all of that is correct. But if a student is ever unsure of whether or not their medical condition, their disability, their chronic health condition, something that's impacting them in their education, if that would qualify them and it's not on our list, you can book a medical advising appointment or a prospective appointment with a CAL advisor, and we will go over all of that with you and kind of help support how to get that documentation or what we're looking for too. So I just wanted to add that in.
Great. Thanks so much, Sydney. There are also some disabilities that do not qualify for CAL accommodations. So a big one is anything that is considered a quote unquote temporary disability, such as a broken bone or a concussion. Now, there are exceptions to that, which we'll get to. But another big one is a qualifying disability that's not formally diagnosed or recognized by a recognized professional. So you may have anxiety or depression or something like that, but are unable to get a formal diagnosis due to, financial barriers or medical wait time barriers. And unfortunately, if you don't have the documentation from a recognized professional to show that you qualify for that, that does not qualify for CAL accommodations. I see a message in the chat that just came up. If a disability was diagnosed in another country, would it still qualify? Sydney or Simon will give you that.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to answer that. And absolutely, we have lots of international students that register with our office and bring with them the medical documentation from their country of origin, their home country. Absolutely, it can be diagnosed in another country as long as there is some kind of documentation there and that it's been translated into English so that we can read it.
Great. So some exceptions to the kind of quote unquote temporary disability caveat is that if your temporary disability, like if you break your arm or something, if that recovery period is expected to last for a whole semester or longer, students may be able to qualify for temporary accommodations. Unfortunately, Cal can't give accommodations to temporary disabilities that are not going to last throughout the semester. So if you have like a broken foot or something and it's a 6-week recovery period, Cal won't be able to give accommodations for that. But if you have something like a serious concussion, Cal may be able to give temporary accommodations while that recovery period is happening. So we talked a bit about recognized professionals, and there are a multitude of different recognized professionals that Cal looks at, and they are based on the diagnosis. So if your disability is physical or mobility related, they need documentation from a physician, so a doctor or a nurse practitioner. If your disability is vision related, so blindness or low vision, an ophthalmologist, an optometrist, or an orthoptist would be the people that they would like to see that from. If you are deaf or hard of hearing, an audiologist. Neurological disorders or disabilities, neurologist, neuropsychologist, psychiatrist, or physician, doctor. Any sort of psychiatric or mental health condition, so that could be anything from like anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, that kind of stuff. Clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, or physician with expertise in that area. And then for learning disabilities, registered clinical psychologist or a certified school psychologist. There are some caveats on the learning disability category, which we'll go into the next slide, which is kind of what is the documentation required for registering for Cal. The documentation that you have has to be less than 3 years old, and it also has to have the professional's name, their title, phone number, etc., the date of the assessment, which is really important, especially for the date of the documentation date, so we know that it's less than 3 years old. The statement of the nature of the disability, including the DSM code if it's a psychiatric disability or ICD code, otherwise, and any sort of impacts that medication may have on the disability. An explanation of the disability's impact on your education, and also the medical professional may be able to make recommendations for specific accommodations. So there is a section on, this is all on the Cal website, by the way, so if you need to look this over again and I'm talking too fast or you just want to review, this is all on the Cal's website, taken right off their website. So you can go back and look on that. But I do want to note that specifically for learning disabilities, there are some different documentation requirements. The main important one being that any learning disability diagnosis must be done using adult measures. So the WAIS-4, for example, is an example. Usually learning disability diagnoses are done with adult measures if someone is 16 or older. So if you are coming into university and you're 18 right now and your diagnosis was done when you were 15, you may need to do another diagnosis, even if your documentation is less than 3 years old. Oh, great. Sydney put that in the chat. Thank you, Sydney. So that is something to consider if you are looking to get documentation for, or you're looking to get accommodations for a learning disability. So let's talk about getting documentation. It can kind of be difficult to talk to your medical provider to understand exactly what do you need and how can they best support you so that Cal can give you the accommodations that you need to be successful in university. So the first tip that I have for you is to discuss the functional impacts of your disability with your doctor. So how exactly does your disability impact your ability to write exams, to attend classes, to hand in assignments, to kind of be a university student. How does your disability impact your day-to-day abilities to be a university student? And what kind of accommodations do you need in order to kind of lessen those disability impacts and to be your best self in an academic setting? If your medical provider is able to speak to that and say kind of what the impacts are and how an accommodation can mitigate that, that helps Cal a lot and gives them kind of more evidence as to why they should give you that accommodation. The second tip is ask Cal to send you a form for your doctor to fill out instead of having them write a letter. Sydney, do you want to speak to this a little bit? I know that you have a bit more information on this.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes if students are getting documentation for the first time, or they've had, say, an ongoing health condition, but they've never had to provide documentation for that before, and they're going through that process. Sometimes it's easier for students and physicians. There's less barriers for them to be able to fill out one of the verification of disability forms that are either provincial or that we have. There's a couple of different options depending on the nature of the medical condition or the disability. Having them write this letter can also sometimes a letter versus a form. Sometimes the letters might not, and sometimes when we say that a documentation doesn't have enough information, it's often in a letter. Whereas when a form is filled out, it clearly has all of the information that we require, and there's a lot less room for error from your doctor providing that note or that letter for you. In addition, if you're a student that has, say, a student loan, then this form can also double as documentation for the different federal grant funding that's available to students with disabilities and chronic health conditions as well.
Thanks, Sydney. We have a
Yes,
chat.
Julie, this form is the same as the Appendix 8 for student loans. Absolutely. That's one of them. Each province has their own.
Great. And we can, if anyone has more questions about student loans and getting grant funding, we can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A session. I don't have a slide on it, but we do have some information on it as well. And then finally, for getting documentation, another tip is to ask your medical assessor to link their recommendations to specific barriers to access. So say you have a disability that impacts that may be pretty dynamic, and it may impact your ability on one day to go to class, but it's kind of unpredictable. You're not sure if that will happen. It may happen on short notice. So using that language of the disability being dynamic and sometimes the symptoms being unpredictable is helpful and may help the Cal advisor be able to give you the accommodations that you need to succeed in an academic environment. So what are the possible accommodation examples that you may be able to receive at UVIC? This is not at all an exhaustive list. There are kind of as many accommodations as there are students. Accommodations can be quite broad or very, very personalized, just depending on the nature of the access need of the student. Also to note that not every single accommodation is available to all students. They are available based on basically access need and barrier to education. There are I've put this in like 3 categories. This is not totally exhaustive, but there are kind of 3 categories, and you may see this on your Cal letters as well. If you ever look at your Cal letters, it may say like classroom and lab accommodations, and then list them, exam accommodations, and list them. So these are kind of like categorically what examples of accommodations may exist. So classroom and lab accommodations, you may be able to get attendance accommodations. As for my example in the last slide, if someone has a relatively dynamic disability and they may not be able to predict when their symptoms are going to flare up, they may be eligible for an attendance accommodation where the instructor will know that the student may miss class from time to time based on their due to their disability. Students may be allowed to have note takers in class, and Cal has a note-taking service that does cost money. So just to note on that one. But there are also peer note takers that your instructor can reach out to the members of your class and say, one of the students in our class has a note-taking accommodation. Would anyone like to volunteer to share their class notes with me, and I will share them with the student. Another accommodation that exists is permission to audio record classes. So some instructors record their lectures already anyway and post them on Brightspace, especially as we have all been through online schooling and Zoom University. A lot more instructors are more confident with being able to record their lectures and post them online. Some instructors, though, are still not comfortable with that. So you may be able to get permission to audio record their class with like a little recording device that you can record with. There may be a accommodation to leave the class and return when needed, just to kind of take breaks, and have the instructor know that you may be leaving and coming back unexpectedly from time to time. And then also computer or technology use in the class. I know that some instructors are a little more, they don't like laptops, or they require certain. I had an instructor once that said like only this part of the classroom you're allowed to use a laptop in. So they may be able to, Cal may be able to help you if you need a computer or an iPad or something like that in your class, if your instructor does not already allow that. In terms of exams, a really common accommodation is extra time on exams and tests with Cal, as well as distraction-reduced rooms or private rooms for exam writing. Students may also qualify for supervised breaks during exams, and to note that usually is included within extra time. It usually isn't like a stop clock situation. I'm not sure if Cal does that, but I do know that that usually is kind of built in with the extra time. And then also the ability to write exams on the computer, having a calculator during an exam. So maybe you're in a math class or a chem class and they don't allow you to use a calculator or a formula sheet. Having those accommodations exist, as well as accessing scrap paper during an exam. And then a few kind of other categories is there are accommodations for assignment deadline flexibility. So whether it be a student has an accommodation to get extensions on assignments, or have all the assignments up front and get like an advance notice of all the assignments, as well as temporary absences from classes. So students may not attend, like they may have an accommodation that they can't attend class for a period of time. And then as well, this one, all Cal students, so any student that registers for Cal qualifies for this accommodation, is a reduced course load. So as an undergraduate student, if you are registered with Cal, you qualify for the accommodation of being considered full-time at 2 courses a semester, so 3 credits, or if you're a graduate student, 1 course a semester, which is 1.5 credits. And so that if you are applying to student loans or required a full-time status for your parents' benefits or something like that for tax purposes, having that, you would still qualify for full-time and receive all the full-time financial benefits, but be able to take less classes. We should also talk about barriers to access with Cal. And, with every service, there are barriers to access. And some of them can be more tricky than others. There has been a history of a high turnover of Cal advisors. Some people maybe switched Cal advisors, every couple years. And that can, especially if you have, a good relationship with a Cal advisor and then the person leaving, that can be a little bit more, harder to access a new person if they don't know your story as much. Some instructors can also be uneducated or reluctant to give accommodations. They may flat out say no, which they shouldn't be able to do. And they if they are doing that, definitely contact your Cal advisor and they will help you out. But some instructors are more reluctant to be flexible. They may not know what Cal is. I once had an instructor that didn't know what Cal was, and they had been at the university for 30 years. So, being aware of, so some instructors just might not know that academic accommodations exist. There's also the financial barrier of getting formal documentation, especially for diagnoses like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD. Those can be pretty costly if you're going through the private route, specifically with autism, an adult diagnosis. There is no funding to get it through the provincial health costs, so it has to be done through a private psychologist. And that can be, a couple $1,000s. So the financial cost of getting a formal diagnosis can be a huge barrier to some people. And without that formal diagnosis and formal documentation, a person cannot access Cal. Cal advisors are also super, super busy. I'm sure Sydney could speak to that. They have a lot of students. There has been an incredibly large increase in students seeking Cal supports and Cal accommodations in the last few years. And as more people come, the advisor capacity, they have more and more students, which means that they might have less time to meet with students, or they may have shorter appointments or whatnot, or there might be a bit of a longer wait time to be able to get accommodations. And also some advisors make accommodation plans differently. No two advisors are exactly the same, and some advisors take slightly different approaches than others. So that can be a bit of a barrier to access if your advisor is maybe not approaching your accommodations in the way that they were hoping, or if you have a new advisor in a way that your old advisor was doing it. So those are a few barriers to access that you may encounter should you want to register with Cal. With that, let's talk about how you can advocate for your needs if you're running into these barriers of access. If your Cal advisor is not meeting your access needs, or you are feeling like you are asking for an accommodation that your documentation states you should have, and a Cal advisor is not being helpful with that, ask to switch Cal advisors if you need to. The SSD can help you with that. And you can also reach out to the Cal Associate Director, and his name is Rowan. And he can help you discuss your accommodation plan if you feel like your specific accommodation plan is not meeting your access needs. You can also connect with your Cal advisor and a department chair if your instructor refuses to honor your accommodations or is being really difficult with your accommodations. Step one would be to talk to the instructor and let them know that you are a Cal student and these are your accommodations. But if they still are being difficult or they're not being helpful, definitely connect with your Cal advisor and or a department chair, and they can help you out. I've had a personal experience with this. I had an instructor that was not honoring my accommodations, and I ended up emailing my Cal advisor, letting them know what happened, emailed my instructor, and just copied them on the emails, and then everything was fine. So sometimes the instructors just need to have that talk with Cal, and then they will do what they need to do properly. But if you need to connect with a department chair, do that. Also, if you are being put in an exam setting, like your instructor refuses to let you write an exam in a distraction reduced room, you are allowed to say, I cannot write this exam because my accommodations are not being met. And that is something to talk to your Cal advisor, but you are allowed to refuse to write that exam if your accommodations are refused to be met. So hopefully that makes you feel a little empowered that like you do have the power to say, I'm not doing this because my accommodations are not being honored. And then kind of encompassing all of this, reach out to myself at the SSD or Adrian, our office coordinator, about resources and individual advocacy that we can do. We have advocated with Cal, with Rowan, the associate director. We've had meetings with Cal advisors themselves. We've advocated with co-ops and careers and practicums. So if you need, if you feel like you're feeling frustrated and you've exhausted your options, talk to us and we will help you kind of navigate the maze that is academic accommodations and having your access needs met. So now I will stop the recording and we are going to have a little Q&A with Cal. If you have any questions for Sydney or Simon, we will go through those. And yes, so let me just stop this recording here. Thank you all. If you are watching the recording, thanks so much for watching, and we hope to see you soon.
Um,